Hey folks, Eltopian here. Thought I'd give you another installment of Hell to Pay, or a little video history about the town and the area I grew up in. I was just thinking of a story today that my dad told when he was a little kid. I told you in the last video about the house they lived in, how it was clapboard and just vertical boards up and down, but it did have a wraparound porch on it around two sides of the house, and out a little ways from one side of the house there was a chicken house, and they had a tall hog wire fence around it, little yard for the chickens so they could at least keep them close by so they wouldn't wander too far out during the day. But anyway, Granddad looked out the window and he saw a chicken hawk sitting up on top of one of those fence posts. And they were tall fence posts. They're about probably 8-foot high fence posts, and I think they were made out of old railroad ties. So the chicken hawk was sitting on top there, and Gramps, he thought, well, he better go get the shotgun and do away with this little varmint. And at the time they had a old double-barreled shotgun. It was an old double-barreled 12 gauge. I never got the chance to see it, unfortunately. It was lost in the family somewhere before I came along. But Dad told me about it. He said it was real light, and it had the old ram horn hammers on it that you pulled back for each barrel. As a matter of fact, whoops, let me show you here. Oh, I should have done this in the first place. Bear with me. It was a lot like this one. Old double-barrel shotgun. Had the old ram horn hammers. Old double triggers. But it was a 12 gauge. And Dad said it was very light. And that also it was an old one at the time. And the stock was loose from the rest of the shotgun. So it had a tendency, once in a while, if you cocked both barrels, they might both go off. Anyway, it kicked pretty good because it was so light. And as my father put it, his dad, my granddad, wasn't very handy with a shotgun or any guns at all. He had the shotgun, and I think they had a 22, and that was about it. They just didn't have many guns around. Not that they couldn't have used them, but they just didn't have the money for them. Anyway, my granddad just didn't happen to be very handy with a gun. But he thought he should dispatch this chicken hawk, so he went in and got the shotgun and went out on the porch and stood there on the porch, and real quiet, and looking at the chicken hawk, and he thought, well, this gun is going to kick quite a bit, so I better brace myself. And he leaned up against the wall of the house with his shoulder in between the wall and the shotgun. Now, those of you who are shooters, you could see the problem already. Well, anyway, he touched that thing off, and both barrels cut loose. And that compounded the problem. And I guess it took a little while for that house to stop shaking. Got the dirt out of the attic, though. But Dad said Grandpa couldn't use that arm very much for about 3 days, and he kind of favored that. Never really sure if he got the chicken hawk or not. They they found the top of the fence post and a few feathers laying on the ground, but nothing much else. But it's just things like that that happened. When my dad was a kid, he could tell about that same house that there weren't any trees around it. There wasn't enough water for the trees. They had to haul water to a cistern. So the only wood around it was sagebrush. And we get hard winters here sometimes. It's a desert out here, but we get pretty good snow. And he told about when they were kids, one winter his dad had went to work out someplace for a week or two, and kids woke up one morning and there was snow as high as the top of the house. And so they dug tunnels out, and they just thought that was great, you know. Dug several tunnels, dug one out the front door, dug one out the back door, and they were just in hog heaven. Dad came home, and Granddad came home, and no, he wasn't going to have any of that. So he made them collapse the tunnels, or at least the tops of them, because he was rightly so afraid that eventually those would cave in on the kids. But Dad said for a while they had some fun. But it was tough out there. It really was. What were some of the other stories Dad told me? There's a couple of stories I've got about being German. That side of my family was German. And, you know, we talk about now illegal immigrants coming into this country, and it's so terrible that they don't learn English and things like that. And I agree. I think English should be the first language. That's it. If you come to this country, if you're going to live here, you should learn to speak English. I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but I believe it that way. But I have to look back in my family, and my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, was from Germany, and she refused to learn English. Just flat refused. And in the early days, even up into the 1920s and probably into the early 30s, there were churches around here in the small towns that would have two services. They'd have a German service, and then later on they'd have an English-speaking service. Because there were a lot of Germans around this part of the country. Yes, they were the only ones crazy enough to settle out here, but I shouldn't say that. But it's kind of ironic. I guess I have to look at it from both sides of the coin. But my great-grandmother, they said she would not learn English. If they want to speak to me, they can speak in German. And I'm sure she knew a little bit of English, but my grandmother, her daughter, was born in this country, raised in this country, but until the day she died, I remember she spoke with a very heavy German accent. She could speak German, but she spoke English every day, but it was with a very pronounced accent till the day she died, up in the 1970s. And she was over 90 years old. I don't know, I guess it's just because they were isolated out here, and all they had, or mostly all they had to talk to were other family members. So German or English, either way, you were understood. Going to school did pose problems, though. my oldest uncle, who's now passed away, he was born in 1907, I believe. And when he was about 10 years old, this would have been just before America's entrance into the First World War, he could remember going to school and more than once being grabbed by some bullies in the school and made to get on his knees and kiss the American flag. That wasn't all that unusual, but there was the man who ran the general store in town, as an example. He didn't seem to care for my grandfather very much, because my grandfather was German. Now, by the time my grandfather came over here, he was far too old to be in the military, so he never went in the First World War. He was too old to be conscripted. And anyway, the guy that ran the store was too, and he had never, as far as I know, been in the military either. But he'd give my grandfather a bad time every time he saw him in his store. Yeah, you should have been in the army. And my dad said he was about 6 years old. He could remember quite vividly he and my grandfather being in the store one time, and the guy that was running the store behind the counter there, he was giving him a bad time about not being in the military, and said my grandfather, who was a stout man, he wasn't fat, he was stout and huge hands, he reached over the counter and grabbed that guy by the collar, pulled him up nose to nose and said, "I'll go when you go," and shoved him back into the wall behind him. It didn't bother Gramps after that. But one of our other neighbors who is still around here, he's even a little older than my dad was, he used to tease my dad. He said, "Yeah, you guys would come into town to go to school, and then just as soon as school let out, you were gone again. You know, you'd never stick around." Well, there was kind of a reason for that. There was a lot of anti-German sentiment, in the early days. It was hard for them to deal with. Anyway, didn't mean to get off on a tangent there or anything, or tell a story that was a downer, but I guess for right now I'll just leave it at that, and I'll try to think of some more lighthearted stories that he told me to tell you next time. Anyway, this was Hell to Pay Part 2, and Eltopia, and I'll see you down the road.